Welcome everyone to today's webinar, Lessons Learned Implementing Effective Process Safety Management Programs in Chemical Startups. I'm Stephanie and I'll be your moderator for today's session. A couple of quick housekeeping notes before we begin. Today's webinar is being recorded and we'll make the recording available to you in the next few days. Please submit any questions using the Q&A box in Zoho webinar and we'll address them at the end. Felicia will be presenting for about 30 minutes and we'll reserve the last 10 minutes or so for your questions. We also have a few polls at the start of today's presentation, so please take a moment to respond when those appear, as your answers will help Felicia tailor the discussion to people who are in the room. Please take a moment to review the disclaimer on your screen. This webinar is intended for informational purposes only and does not constitute professional advice. The views expressed are those of the presenter and do not necessarily reflect those of Accutech Group. This session is being recorded, and by participating, you consent to that recording. Today's webinar is part of Accutech's Process Safety Summer Series, 3 free sessions on practical challenges in process safety and risk analysis, designed for professionals who want actionable insights and real-world lessons. On August 4th, David Heller will take us through How Facilitation Skills Will Travel, where he'll be examining the technical and interpersonal skills that define successful facilitation across industries and how to lead analyses even in unfamiliar territory. The registration link for that will be on the screen at the end of today's session. And remember, you can find all of our webinar recordings on our website and our YouTube page. We'll also have a QR code at the end of the presentation that goes directly there. For those joining an Accutech webinar for the first time, a brief introduction. Since 1994, Accutech's been a global leader in consulting, training, and software solutions for process risk management. We bring deep expertise in both the management and technical aspects of risk, working with organizations ranging from the world's largest companies to government agencies, all with the goal of improving safety, security, environmental, and operational performance. So what are we covering today with Felicia? Chemical startups are emerging across some of the most exciting growth sectors in the industry: sustainable materials, energy storage, green chemistry, process intensification, and circular economy solutions. But today's session is valuable well beyond the startup world. Whether you're actively implementing PSM in a startup environment or leading an established company through growth, technology change, capacity expansion, or organizational transformation, the challenges Felicia will cover today will resonate, as they're not startup exclusive problems. They show up in first-of-a-kind technologies, pilot-to-pilot commercial scale-ups, acquisitions, new product lines, aggressive capital programs, and organizational restructurings at companies of every size and maturity. Felicia will walk us through 7 key challenges, contrasting the startup reality with the advantages held by established companies, and will offer practical risk-based strategies for designing PSM elements that are fit for purpose, scalable, and resilient, helping organizations avoid over-engineering governance while still controlling high-consequence risk. So it's my pleasure today to introduce you to Felicia. She's a chemical engineer with over 30 years of experience in operations and consulting, specializing in process safety management. She's a highly skilled PSM professional and accomplished auditor, having led numerous PSM and RMP audits across diverse industries. She's directed comprehensive PSM program implementations and driven targeted improvements across key elements, including PHA, management of change, facility siting, and mechanical integrity programs. Most recently, she received the 2025 Global Congress on Process Safety CCPS Best Paper Award for her paper, PHA, Common Misses with Significant Risks, which tells you something about both her expertise and her commitment to advancing the field. So before Felicia dives in, we've got 3 quick poll questions that'll pop up on your screen. These will help Felicia get a feel for the room and just make sure today's content is as relevant as possible. So let me pull up the first question here. And we'll give you just a moment to vote here. Seeing the votes come in. All right, thanks everyone. Okay, so Felicia, for this first poll, we have 0% yes early stage. So most voted was no, I work for an established company, which is great. We've got only 1% in growth stage And then no, I'm a consultant or service provider was about 33%. So the vast majority was 61% no, I vote for an established company. All right, let me try the second poll here. Second one, are you currently implementing a PSM program? All right, we've got almost all the votes in. All right, so for the are you currently implementing a PSM program, we've got about 15% in the early stages, 20% mid-implementation, 40%, that's the highest category here, is yes, our program is established, 10% no, but we're planning to, and 19% no, but PSM doesn't apply. All right. And let's go to our last poll this morning. Have you ever had to implement a PSM program? All right, thanks everyone. About halfway. Okay, so let me publish these results here. We've got the highest one selected was yes, I've led a PSM implementation, about 35%. I've joined a PSM program was 30%. Not yet, but it's on the horizon, one person here. And no, I'm here to learn. I can't read the end of this poll, but no, I'm here to learn was 23%. And no, PSM doesn't apply was 9%. So again, majority was yes, joined. So with that, thanks everyone for participating in our polls and helping Felicia know her audience. And with that, Felicia, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Stephanie. Hi, everyone. Thank you all for your time. I know your time is valuable. And the good news is, even if you aren't a PSM covered program, process safety is always something that you can learn from, because there's always potential for process safety events, even if you're not covered by the PSM standard. And then the other thing is, at the end of the day, you may learn about the 7 wonders of the ancient world. So that'll be cool. But I'm certain that there's something in this presentation that can benefit all of you, because the struggles that are faced when you're implementing PSM at a startup are very similar to the same struggles you face when you're implementing or you're working on improving your PSM program in a well-established company. So I know everybody's going to learn something from this. And the other thing that I'm really excited about, this is my first webinar. In all of my 30-something years of experience, I have not done a webinar before. So you guys will be my guinea pigs. So hopefully this will go great, and I'll entertain you as well as inform you during our discussion. So again, thanks, Stephanie, for everything. And thanks everybody for being here. So now on with the show. So these slides were originally presented at the GCPS Spring Conference earlier this year, and they're based on a paper that I co-authored with Christina Wyatt. And to help make it more fun, a discussion, and more memorable to you to kind of implant it in your gray matter, we've mapped each challenge that I present to a wonder of the ancient world. But again, keep in mind that these challenges are not necessarily unique to startups. So you're going to see a lot of parallels, even for those of you that are in the established companies with established PSM programs. You're going to see a lot of parallels, and I think you'll glean a lot from this discussion anyway. At least I hope so. So let's get started. So let's begin at looking why startups face unique PSM challenges. Well, startups have fewer resources, less data, and faster iteration versus mature companies. High growth technology sectors such as sustainable materials, energy storage, and circular economy technologies dominate the current chemical startup landscape. And this is only going to improve even more in the future. As we try to solve the world's problems, we're going to have more and more startups that are implementing PSM programs. So these things are primarily driven by venture capital and partnerships. But unlike mature companies, startups face operational challenges such as small teams, limited histories, and rapidly evolving design. This significantly complicates PSM implementation and risk prioritization. Startups often have unprecedented chemistries and specialty equipment in new applications, and this results in uncertain hazards. This is further compounded due to heightened regulatory scrutiny and high pressure investor expectations. The stakes are much higher for startups versus established companies, as one process safety event can mean the end of the startup altogether. So now let's look at how we've mapped these challenges to the 7 wonders of the ancient world. And again, I did this to be catchy, but to hopefully help this implant in your brain as to what these challenges are. And they paralleled very nicely with the 7 wonders of the ancient world. So we're going to take a journey today and learn about PSM and also learn about the 7 wonders of the ancient world. So the first challenge is customization over replication. And this one we map to the Great Pyramid of Giza. The second challenge is insufficient PSI. And we map this to the Hanging Gardens of Babylon. Our third challenge is compressed or inadequate safety reviews. And we parallel this to the statue of Zeus at Olympia. The fourth challenge is scaling challenges. And we've mapped this to the Temple of Artemis at Ephesus. Our fifth challenge, employee participation and culture, goes along nicely with the mausoleum at Halicarnassus. Our sixth challenge, management of change, which is all of our personal favorites, goes very nicely with the Colossus of Rhodes. And our last challenge is incident investigation, and we'll look at that from the perspective of the Lighthouse of Alexandria. So with all of those challenges, those of you that are in established companies can see those are the same challenges you face also in terms of PSM. So for our first challenge, we looked at this one from the point of view of the Great Pyramid of Giza. So that's about customization over replication. The Great Pyramid of Giza is the only ancient wonder that's still standing. It's not standing because it was the biggest or the most complex, but because it was engineered precisely for its environment, its purpose, its constraints. And that's the core message for PSM and startups. Safety programs must be built for the organization that actually exists, not copied from a legacy system built for a completely different company. In the startup space, we often see leadership assume that the fastest path to compliance is copy, paste, and go from PSM frameworks that they knew in their large, already established companies. This approach is fundamentally flawed. Legacy PSM systems were designed for organizations with large teams, stable organizations, extensive documentation infrastructure, and significant administrative capacity. Startups, however, operate with minimal staffing, limited specialization, and rapidly shifting organizational structures. So if you copy a mature PSM system into a startup, you create an immediate mismatch between what the program expects and what the organization can realistically support. It's the same way for your established companies when a new PSM director comes into the company. That new PSM director often thinks, hey, I can just copy what I did at my last company. That fails miserably at times because your last company is not the current company that you work for. So the consequences are that such a misalignment are over documentation, procedural noncompliance, blind spots undermining safety, and weak safety culture. A PSM program must be intentionally engineered, just like the pyramid, to align with the environment, purpose, and constraints of the startup itself. Customization isn't optional, it's foundational. So what's the solution that we can offer to address this? Like the Great Pyramids of Giza, a strong foundation endures when a PSM program is fit for purpose and designed for the startup organizational structure. Providing a scaled, risk-based PSM solution instead of just a copy-paste approach is the best answer. Tailored, risk-based PSM, scale PSM to startup size, and use your limited resources wisely. Eliminate hazards early. Use inherently safer design to avoid or minimize risk before adding complexity. Simplify your process where you can. Minimize holdup quantities. Use external expertise strategically. Leverage consultants, such as myself, academics, and digital tools to fill knowledge and resource gaps. Document assumptions clearly. A right-sized, fit-for-purpose PSM program is both a compliance asset and a competitive advantage because it supports safe scale-up, investor confidence, and sustainable long-term growth. In the same way with your established companies, you have to meet, when you go to a new company to work, you have to meet them where they're at in their PSM journey. Again, a right-sized program is going to fit you best, whether you're in a startup or whether you're in an established program. Our second challenge is insufficient PSI, and we all struggle with this, even if we're well-established companies. Somehow the PSI has gotten lost along the way. That is just the way it works out. The Hanging Gardens of Babylon is what we parallel this insufficient PSI to. And this is because the Hanging Gardens of Babylon are the least documented of all the wonders. In fact, there's so little evidence that historians debate whether they ever existed at all. This symbolism fits perfectly here because startups often operate with PSI that is incomplete, uncertain, or based on assumptions. Just like the gardens, you're working with gaps, ambiguity, and plenty of unknowns. Startups face PSI challenges such as novel chemistries and processes with little or no historical data, first of its kind equipment design that lacks production scale precedent, compressed schedules, leaving insufficient time for exhaustive documentation. In a startup environment, you can't wait for perfect data. Progress depends on making informed assumptions and managing the risks that come with the unknown. Innovation demands courage. You must boldly go where no one has gone before. So what's a solution that we can offer to this? Well, balance speed with rigor. To overcome PSI uncertainty startups face, the key is balancing rapid innovation with structured, deliberate analysis. Here's how teams can do that effectively. Leverage analogous data. Use information from similar chemistries, related unit operations, or comparable processes as your starting point. Engage external expertise. It's okay to phone a friend. That's a great idea. Bring in consultants, academic partners, or equipment vendors who've seen variations of your problem before. Their external perspective can fill knowledge gaps, validate assumptions, and significantly reduce risk. Conduct iterative hazard reviews. Perform PHAs early on and revisit them often. As data evolves, so should your hazard analysis. Treat it as a living, continuously updated process, not a single milestone you just check off. Use pilot testing and modeling. Bench scale tests, modeling, and simulation tools can provide insight before you move to pilot or full scale. These small experiments buy you safety, clarity, and confidence. Document uncertainty transparently. Regulators and stakeholders respond well to honesty. Clearly flag where the data is estimated, where assumptions were necessary, and how you plan to validate them over time. Forge ahead safely because recklessness is not innovation, it's a liability. Our third challenge is inadequate or compressed safety reviews, and we map this to the statue of Zeus at Olympia. So this statue was enormous and it was very impressive, but the temple built around it was too small. So as a result, visitors couldn't move around, gain perspective, or see the whole structure. It was a masterpiece, but it was squeezed into a space that couldn't support it. That's exactly what happens with safety reviews in many chemical startups. The problem usually isn't technical skills. Startup engineers are smart, capable, and creative. The real issue is governance and maturity under milestone pressures. Startups operate in a completely different economic reality. Funding is tied to milestones, mechanical completion, first chemical, first revenue. These milestones are valuation events, and missing one can threaten investor confidence or survival. Under that kind of pressure, safety reviews become schedule-driven instead of risk-driven. As a result, PHAs often happen late in design after the major capital decisions are already locked in. At that point, no one wants to uncover hazards that force redesign or delays. Reviews end up validating the design instead of challenging it. In addition, potential hazards associated with package units are often ignored based on the assumption that if the equipment was skid mounted or used elsewhere, the safety work's already done. So what's missed is the integration risk, how that unit interacts with the site utilities, controls, relief systems, siting, and people. Equipment that's safe on a vendor test pad can still introduce new hazards once installed at your location. Then there's PSSR. When pressure is at its peak, PSSR happens. In mature organizations, PSSR authority sits outside the project team by design. In startups, that separation often doesn't exist. The same leaders that are pushing for startup are frequently the ones approving it. The root problem isn't lack of concern for safety, it's that physical facilities mature faster than the governance needed to manage them. Capital outpaces PSM maturity, creating the perfect conditions for compressed reviews at the moment when robust reviews matter the most. Remember, compressed reviews may save you hours now, but they can cost you millions later. So what's a solution that we can offer to address this challenge? Early, frequent, right-size reviews. You cannot drop a fully built, best-in-class PSM program into a startup on day one. It's just not realistic. Instead, scale governance intentionally, in step with the company's growth. Again, meet people where they are on their journey. This is the case for well-established programs as well. Start with tiered reviews at key milestones: bench, pilot, demonstration, commercial. Don't wait for one big PHA right before startup when flexibility is gone. Build smaller reviews along the way. Let risk understanding grow with the process, not get forced into one late and often very expensive moment. Second, align with how startups actually work. They iterate constantly. Conditions change, equipment changes, design evolves. If your safety model assumes a static design, you'll always lag reality. Instead, align PSM with iteration cycles. Do short form hazard reviews for design changes. Clear triggers for deeper review. Lightweight but disciplined MOC, even in the early phases. Third, again, document assumptions. Startups rely on assumptions more than they realize. And you'll hear these phrases: well, the vendor covered it. We'll stay below the limits. This is temporary. Capturing those assumptions prevent normalization of optimism. The goal isn't to slow things down. It's to avoid rework, instability, and early incidents. The bottom line, governance doesn't have to be heavy, but it does have to be intentional, scalable, and in place before the first chemical flows. Now, our fourth challenge, scaling. So the ancient wonder that best represents scaling challenges is the Temple of Artemis at Ephesus. It was destroyed and rebuilt multiple times by fire, conflict, redesign, expansion. But each rebuild wasn't just a larger version of the last. It was a fundamentally new engineering project every time. That's exactly what scaling looks like in chemical startups. Scaling is rarely linear. It's rebuilding, relearning, and re-engineering. As processes scale from lab to pilot to demonstration to commercial, behaviors change. Heat removal becomes harder. A reaction that stayed cool in a flask can run hot in a large reactor. Mixing slows, control responses lag, mechanical realities emerge. For example, vortexing, fouling, wear, and entrainment. Relief behavior can also change as foaming, two-phase flow, or faster gas generation overwhelm systems that are sized on optimistic pilot assumptions. Industrial equipment does not behave like glassware. Fouling, plugging, solids buildup are harder to detect, harder to clear, and far more expensive. A plugged lab reactor can be discarded. A plugged industrial reactor, filter dryer, or heat exchanger cannot. and replacement lead times can stretch into months. Equipment design and operations must anticipate pluggage and be prepared for safe cleanout. Scaling isn't just an engineering step. It's where assumptions are tested, exposed, and often torn down so the next version of the process can be rebuilt stronger. Like the Temple of Artemis, every scale is a reconstruction, not a replica. This brings us to how can we solve this problem? Solution number 4, plan flexibility and stepwise learning. Don't plan for confidence. Build in flexibility designed for learning. In simple, relatable terms, hope for the best, but plan for the worst. Go ahead and design in bypasses, clean out access, spare nozzles, and sufficient maintenance isolation. Set safety limits, validate them at each stage. Plan for manual and degraded modes of operation and train and drill accordingly. Between each scale, lab to pilot, pilot to demo, demo to commercial, build in a learn, pause, adjust gate. Reflect, reflect, reflect. At each stage, ask, what did we learn? What must we change before going bigger? What do we need to validate next? Don't advance until the gaps are closed. The goal is not to slow innovation, it's to prevent the organization from outrunning its own understanding. Yesterday's success does not guarantee tomorrow's safety. Challenge number 5. So challenge 5 focuses on employee participation and safety culture. And we map this to the mausoleum at Halicarnassus. The mausoleum wasn't built all at once. It was created layer by layer, shaped by many people over time. Safety culture works the same way. Early layers matter most as they build the foundation. For startup companies, safety culture is not inherited. It's created in real time from day one. Culture doesn't wait for headcount. It forms immediately. The first employees set the expectations for how work gets done. If speed is rewarded over discipline or shortcuts are accepted, this becomes the norm, and habits form faster than procedures. Another challenge is catching or missing early warning signs. Operators often see weak signals. In larger, more mature companies, formal systems like reporting programs, safety committees, and near-miss processes capture these signals. Startups may not have such systems yet, so weak signals stay local, and weak signals are where incidents start. There's also a human factor that's magnified in startups. Size matters. In small teams, speaking up can feel uncomfortable. Leadership is visible. The mission feels shared. And raising concerns can feel like you're slowing progress. That's why leadership response matters so much. When leaders listen and act, people continue to speak up. When concerns are minimized, silence becomes normal, and silence scales fast. The takeaway is simple. Early choices shape everything that follows. Employee participation must lead to action, not just more meetings. Leaderships must close the loop. You said, we acted. Those early tiers determine whether the future culture stands tall or whether it crumbles because of shaky foundation. So again, to reiterate, solution number 5 is lean, agile participation. Because culture forms on day one, the solution isn't to wait until we're big enough. Aim for lean, agile participation that scales with the company's growth. Make participation part of the scaling plan, not just an afterthought. When you have 10 employees, structure safety discussions. When you have 20 employees, implement near-miss tracking. When you go from pilot to commercial, establish formal safety committees. At the next headcount tier, appoint named employee PSM representatives. This keeps engagement proactive and predictable. Embed frontline voices in core PSM work. Include operators in PHAs, MOC reviews, incident investigations, and procedure walkdowns. Make reporting simple and the response visible. Startups do not need enterprise software. They need truth in action. One shared log, a weekly 15-minute safety huddle, clear owners and status for every item, public closure. You said, we did. When people see their input lead to action, even small action, Reporting accelerates, trust grows, and weak signals surface early. When issues vanish into silence, participation collapses. The bottom line, don't build heavy, complicated systems early on. Instead, build the right habits early. In startups, culture grows faster than policy. Lean participation, powered by visible closure, is how to anchor a safety culture that lasts. Challenge number 6, management of change. And this challenge is familiar to well-established folks as well as those who are starting a PSM for a chemical startup. We mapped the management of change to the Colossus of Rhodes. So the Colossus was a marvel, but it collapsed due to an earthquake. It wasn't poorly designed. It was vulnerable because the external forces acting on it weren't fully understood. Startups face the same reality. External forces like design updates, evolving controls, staffing changes, commissioning discoveries, those things are constant. Change is the constant. Nothing is static. And unrecognized change is one of the biggest safety risks. A common startup issue is failing to separate project change from operational change. So project MOC focuses on scope, cost, and schedule, while operational MOC focuses on safety and risk. In small teams, the same people often manage both, and critical reviews can be missed. There's a familiar tension. Processing every change slows progress, but ignoring change allows silent hazards to build. Under pressures to move fast, MOC can feel like friction, yet every unreviewed change adds risk as systems scale. This becomes dangerous through drift. Small deviations and undocumented fixes may seem harmless, but together they create hidden risk that often appears only during an upset when it's too late. The challenge isn't just managing change, it's knowing which changes matter, reviewing them fast enough, and preventing drift from becoming the invisible earthquake that topples your Colossus. The takeaway is simple. Change will happen constantly. In startups, our job is to make sure meaningful changes are visible, evaluated, and controlled, even when speed pressures push hard in the opposite direction. This brings us to solution number 6. Simplify and clarify MOC. If the challenge is that nothing stays the same, the solution is to make MOC simple and clear so people actually use it as the plan evolves. So first, triage changes by hazard, not paperwork. Use a quick screen for every change. High-risk changes go through a full MOC. Medium-risk changes get a focused technical review. Low-risk changes need minimal review. The goal is the right level of review where it truly matters. Second, keep the mechanics lightweight but mandatory. Use a one-page MOC that captures the basis for the change, hazards, affected procedures, approvals, training needs, and whether a PSSR is required. Completeness matters more than complexity, especially in fast-moving startup environments. Third, clearly separate project MOC from operational MOC. Make it obvious what applies before and what applies after the hazardous inventory is present. Clear workflows prevent gaps and ensure that these different changes are appropriately managed. Finally, teach MOC through examples emphasizing hazards. Focus training on the changes people make using real examples to show what requires MOC, what doesn't, and why. The bottom line, make MOC visible, understandable, and actionable so progress doesn't outpace risk. MOC is the anchor bolt. It doesn't stop the earthquake, but it keeps the structure standing. And now we're at our last challenge, incident investigation. Right-sizing incident investigation is this final challenge, and we've mapped it to the lighthouse at Alexandria. This was a beacon that helped sailors see hidden hazards and navigate uncertainty. That's the role incident investigation plays in startups and in established companies. It shines the light on risk before the organization runs aground. Lean organizations don't have the capacity to deep dive every incident. Near misses are often the earliest signs of system drift when real operations begin to differ from design intent. These show up as small anomalies that are easy to dismiss because nothing bad happened this time. Examples appear quickly. A relief valve lifts unexpectedly. An interlock trips during commissioning. An operator develops a workaround, or alarms start getting suppressed. Individually, these seem minor, but together they point to growing weaknesses in design, procedures, training, or scale-up assumptions. If you overreact and launch full investigations for everything, teams are going to burn out and stop reporting. If you underreact, you miss the signals that could prevent future more significant incidents. That's why tiered investigation is essential. Not every incident needs a detailed investigation, but every incident needs to be evaluated. So let's pause on that, because that's true regardless of whether you're establishing PSM for a startup or you're at a well-established program already. Not every incident needs a detailed investigation, but every incident needs to be evaluated. Matching investigation depth to risk or potential risk preserves resources while still capturing learning. In startups, near misses often reveal that governance maturity is lagging operational complexity. The goal isn't perfection, it's early detection through disciplined, proportional response. Remember, response shapes culture. Thank people for reporting, share lessons learned, track actions to closure. A lighthouse only helps if the light is on, and right size investigation keep that light shining. This brings us to our final solution for challenge 7, tiered investigations. Tier 1, minor events, obvious causes, low consequence potential. So when you get a tier 1 incident to investigate, fix it, share the lesson, and move on. Don't over process. Tier 2, moderate events, repeats, or near misses with real consequence potential. This is the tier that prevents smaller anomalies from turning into big events. Tier 3, high severity events or significant near misses. At this tier, the fixes have to be tough enough to survive the next potential upset. Use predefined triggers, not emotions, to pick the tier. Without triggers, depth becomes personality and visibility driven. With triggers, it's governance. Culture matters. Thank reporters, share findings and themes, track actions to closure, and show your progress. A lighthouse guides by shining only what you need, enough to warn you, and focused enough to help you steer clear. Tiered investigations do the same. Use the right light for the right storm, so learning is continuous and the ship stays off the rocks. So on our final key takeaways, scale PSM to the hazards and organizational maturity. Treat PHAs and PSI as living, breathing things. Design in flexibility and meet everything where you're at in the journey. Engineer participation and culture early on. Keep MOC and investigations light but disciplined. Startups thrive when their safety systems evolve at the same pace the company grows. So build it brick by brick, layer by layer, and wonder by wonder. So that's all I've got. So now I think we'll take some questions.
Yeah, so if you've got any questions for Felicia, please make sure to put them in the Q&A box. And thanks, Felicia, for a great presentation, exactly the kind of practical experience-based guidance that's so hard to find on this topic. PSM in dynamic, fast-moving environments, whether that's a startup or an established company navigating significant change, doesn't get really enough attention in the industry, and today's session was a real service to everyone working in that space. So let's spend the next 10 minutes or so on your questions. Let's start with this one here. When you're right-sizing PSM elements in a startup, how do you know where to push back on what might feel like shortcuts versus where compression's actually acceptable? How do you draw that line?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think for me, in my experience, it's always important, just like with all things, to look at things from the point of view of risk or potential risk, because you can let some things be less time consuming if the risk is lower. But if the risk is high, then you need to stand your ground. And that's why the one about performing PHAs and performing them early on and making them iterative is so important, because you can't, if you wait till the last minute, then you're not going to be able to affect the outcome. So think about it early, talk about it early, and push back when somebody wants to shortcut something that can have a high risk. But when something has a low risk, then a shortcut may be absolutely appropriate. So I think that's how I would look at it. Great question.
Let's see, next one. You mentioned strengthening safety culture with limited resources. In your experience, what's one thing that's had the biggest impact on employee participation and buying in a startup environment where everyone's wearing multiple hats and moving fast?
Yeah, and I think this another great question. Again, I think this is important for whether it's a startup or an established company. You know, there's that adage of, some people say, well, that's not my job. And the thing about especially PSM and startups is everything is your job. You are wearing multiple hats all the time. And that's really not any different for established companies. I think it's really important for people to always focus on, instead of saying, you know, that's not my job or somebody else will handle that, offer your opinions, offer your solutions. But if you're in management, make sure you're listening to people. That's the biggest thing to drive employee participation and culture, is to let people know, I hear what you're saying. We're looking at that. We're doing this. And that whole, you said this, we did that, that's, you know, monumentally important, whether you're at a startup or whether you're at an established company, because trust matters and people see through that. So you want to make sure that you always strengthen your safety culture with foundational things like trust and building that trust. And I say to my kids a lot of times, I have a teenager, and I say to my daughter all the time, you know, I'm going to trust you until you give me a reason not to. And I think that's very true in even established companies, is if you always display that I'm listening to you mentality, and I'm taking the input that you're bringing to me and I'm acting upon it, that's how to strengthen your safety culture, whether you're in a startup or whether you're in an established company.
Good advice. Let's see, we've got a lot of questions coming in.
Okay.
A lot of startups move from pilot to commercial scale quickly. What's the biggest PSM mistake you see company make during that transition, the thing that catches people off guard?
You know, I think that I used a phrase, and I really like it. You know, I have Feliciaisms all the time, but normalization of optimism. So it's important to think optimistically, but hope for the best, plan for the worst. So when you're moving from pilot to commercial scale, I cannot stress enough those importances of building in, what if this goes wrong? What if something becomes plugged? The ability to clean something out, the ability to remove a section of piping, because it is true, and I've seen this in startups that I've been involved in. When a whole reactor plugs up, you can't just throw that away. That takes a lot more time than if your reactor in the lab plugs up. Yeah, I'm going to toss that and get a new one. So I think building in the thought of something could go wrong, what are we going to do about it? Build that in advance. And then when you go from pilot to commercial scale, the surprises will not catch you off guard. So that's kind of my thought to approaching that.
Nice. Okay. Could you share a few real life examples of success and failure?
Oh, yeah, that's a good one. Okay. So yeah, so I'm gonna start with failure moments. Okay. So I'll kind of air my dirty laundry and show y'all. So when I was younger, I did a lot of dynamic simulation, and what was really funny is when things wouldn't work, I would say, but my simulation converged. I don't know why that doesn't work. And the thing is, when you're younger, you kind of think all things are going to be easy and you can solve everything. And I think that that's not always the case. So failure moment is not realizing your own limitations or a company's limitations or an organization's limitations. So that's a failure moment. But then that can also be turned into a positive. So what I've seen now with a lot of startups that I've been involved in, and some that I'm no longer with, but they're still thriving. So they're still surviving. So, the dedication to continue the effort, continue the hard work, fight the fight, stay in the battle, because, tomorrow may be your crowning achievement. Okay. And I know it's hard sometimes because you get down, but a lot of it is really just a matter of perseverance. And you try something, and if that something doesn't work, you get up and try again. You think about Thomas Edison, how many times he failed before we had electricity. Okay. So failure is not necessarily a bad thing. It's a learning opportunity. And as I've gotten older, I've been able to think more of my failures as learning opportunities. And I just encourage everybody to do that, because life happens.
Oh, let's see. We've got a couple more. For startup time available for PSM implementation is very low. How do you speed up implementation of RBPS? How do you advise on the priority of elements to be implemented?
Yeah. Okay. So priority of elements to be implemented is huge, and it's hard to say one element is more important than another. But in a startup setting, some are more important than the other. So employee participation is clearly very important, because from day one, the first employee that you have and the fifth employee that you have, everybody's got to be involved and everybody's got to wear multiple hats. So that's fundamentally important. The next, probably most important one in startups, and this is not necessarily any different for established companies, process safety information. So in established companies, you may have the process safety information, but sometimes attrition loses it over time. In new programs, you may not have the process safety information, but you can make certain assumptions. And again, exercise your phone a friend option. Use things to think, well, this technology is really similar to this other existing technology, so let's approach it that way. So what you can't do is you can't get mired in the mud. Okay. If you're stuck in the mud, you're not going to make any forward progress. So process safety is really important. And then probably a close tie for third is going to be PHA and management of change, because hazard reviews are so important for startups. And I emphasized a lot in the paper, and y'all we're happy to share the paper with you too. It doesn't talk about the wonders of the ancient world, but it goes into depth on all the challenges of the solution. So PHA, start it early. Do small steps early. Maybe not a 6-week review early, but a mini review, so that you can kind of say, oh, this is going to come up in the future. We need to know how we're going to address this, versus saying, oh, well, we're going to wait until the end. We're already done. That's not a good plan. Not a good plan at all. And then management of change. But management of change is a problem for all of us, regardless of whether we're a startup or whether we're at an established company. So managing change is so important for everybody. And I see the same mistakes in startups as in established companies. Sometimes people think, well, I'm going to get this special software and it's going to solve all my problems. That special software may not solve all your problems. You may need to think more in terms of, let me make the system less complex so that people will get in there and will bring changes to the discussion point, versus, oh, the system is so hard for me to use, I'm just going to ignore documenting this change. Because I see that happen whether you're in a PSM startup or whether you're an established company. So that's kind of where I would define the important elements for a startup, but that they're not all that different for established companies either. They're really not. So I hope that answered.
Maybe we'll do one last question. So let's see. A lot of startups are founded by laboratory researchers, such as from universities. Do you have any suggestions on how to bridge the gap between industry PSM expertise and the academic research world? And then they even said this webinar is a great resource for this.
Yes. Okay. And this is a great question, and I have been there, done that, got the t-shirt on this one. So a recent PSM startup that I was involved in, it was a lab driven based experience. And when I started talking about PSM, I didn't read the room well because the lab people had no idea what I was saying. Okay. So PSM is not necessarily known to everybody else. So I think it's very important, and I hope you can still hear me. Stephanie, you froze up on the screen.
I can still hear you. I don't know.
Okay, good. Okay, wonderful.
You.
That's okay. That's okay. I just wanted to make sure that you can still hear me. So again, meeting people where they're at in their journey is very important, and listening to what people understand and don't understand about PSM is also fundamentally important. So those laboratory people may not have any idea what you're saying when you say we need to do a PHA. So you need to it's not dumb it down. You just need to explain it in terms that they can understand this is what we're trying to do. Management of change, for example, when you're talking about management of change program, and I think everybody realizes this now, just because your PSM covered process and a PSM covered company, that doesn't mean that managing change isn't important to other industries that are not PSM covered process. Managing change is important to them too. It's just they're looking through it through a different lens. So I think it's really important, and I'm hoping that I've gotten better at this as I've gotten older, to be able to see things through someone else's lens. Okay. And so to be able to look at those laboratory people, especially if you're a chemical engineer, we've been in labs before. Yeah, it might have been when we were in school, but we can relate to what happens at lab scale, and we can help them relate to what happens at industrial scale if we all just try to look through each other's lenses. So I think that's the fundamental thing that I can offer there. And if anybody wants some additional background on that, I'm happy to talk with them offline to give more insight.
Great. Well, that sounds good. And I think with that will bring us to the end of today's webinar. So on behalf of everyone at Accutech, on behalf of Felicia, thank you so much for joining us this afternoon. Today's discussion was grounded in startup environments, but as Felicia showed, the lessons apply broadly. So if your organization's navigating a first-of-a-kind technology, pilot to commercial scale, scale-up, acquisition, new product line, aggressive capital program, or significant reorganization, the same PSM changes tend to surface. We hope today gave you practical strategies to get ahead of them and a framework for designing safety programs that are fit for purpose and scalable without sacrificing control of high consequent risk. So the recording of today's webinar will be available in the next few days. We'll send you a link once it's posted. This is a great one to share with colleagues in startup environments or with investors and leadership teams who may not fully appreciate what PSM implementation actually involves. If you need a PDH certificate for today's session, please email us at contact@accutechconsulting.com. We'll get that right out to you. And if your question didn't get answered, don't worry, we'll follow up with you directly. If today's session resonated with your situation, or whether you're building a PSM program from scratch or looking for an outside perspective, or navigating a specific challenge like MOC or PHA in a resource-constrained environment, Accutech's team is here to help, so reach out to us at this same email or visit our website. And thank you again, a big thanks to Felicia for a truly excellent presentation, and we hope to see you at a future Accutech webinar. Have a great afternoon, everyone.
Thanks, y'all. Bye-bye.